Okay, this video is it's part 2 to the login system. It's gonna show you how to actually do the query of the database to make sure we got a registered user. In order for this to work, you're gonna need to make sure you've got a database. So if I look at my Server Explorer, again, here's my database. I've got user ID, login name and a password, and admin or user status. Okay, and a forename. That's what I'm using. If you've got something slightly different, then you're going to need to adapt what you do, but you can still follow the main parts of the video. Okay, so what we're going to do, so let's have a look at what we've got. So if we go back to my default page, this is what the code looks like. So I've got my login name, password, login button, logout button, my registration link, which I'm not messing about with yet, my welcome div, which is there but doesn't have anything on. Notice that it's quite nice and it'll tell you what the ID of a div is, which is quite pleasant of it. That says main content. Remember, divs can go inside divs. Okay, so what we want to do is process the login button and the logout button. Okay, now the logout button, I named it BT logout. Just like a Windows form, if I double click the button, it'll create code that'll run, which is, I think, is quite amazing. I'm going to put an XML comment on top of this, so ///, and I'm going to say logout current user. So this is the easy thing to do. Now what we ought to do is those storage items, user ID, name and access level, should be wiped. Okay, so we set them to a default value. Now we could do that manually by saying name equals, I say storage.name equals bubba, etc. Okay, and I could say storage, don't do this, user ID equals -1. But it would be nicer to create a little subroutine to do that. Okay, so I'm going to create a subroutine, storage dot clear user, I'm going to call it, because I'm going to use this from various different areas. There might be something that I want to block somebody and I want to remove all the login details. So I'm going to create this subroutine. Now it doesn't exist. Okay, I haven't got a subroutine called clear user in my storage class, but I want this status, so I call that F status. Don't put things you don't need, because that will create more data to send to the web page. So we want to minimize that. We're going to build this up in lines. Okay, so I've left a space, that's important, at the end of this first line, and then I've put plus to say that this line carries on. Okay, so I'm going to bring that from, I'm putting all the SQL keywords in capitals to make it easy for me to debug. My table is called TBL user. So TBL, yours will be somewhat different. Leave another space, start a new line. So I'm doing these on separate lines. Now, I want to retrieve these details for the login name and password that have been given me. Okay, so I'm going to say where my F login name, and I don't have to have this as part of the things I bring back, equals question mark, which means a parameter. And we'll do that bit now. And the password equals a parameter. And then I put a semicolon, because that tells SQL that's the end of that statement. I want to put now a double quote to say that's the end of my text. And to say that this is the end of my string statement, I put a semicolon. So don't be confused by that. Notice it's put it in red, because we've got text. So it's helping us with that. Okay, so let's just quickly review that. So we select these three field details from this table, where the login name for a record matches a parameter that we're going to give, and the password also matches. Okay, right, we're now going to create the parameters for this. So let's create parameters in same order as in query. So we'll need the login name parameter first. Right, so we do this by creating a parameter collection. So if you start typing, it should come up in the picker, so use the picker. don't want a long name for this, so I'm not worried about that. So I'm just going to call it PC. So that's an object that we want to create an instance of. Okay. So we've got PC is the object, parameter collection is the class. Right. So we're going to add our first parameter. So I'm going to say PC dot add, and it's going to be a new parameter, and its name is question mark. Every single parameter has to be given as text. Okay, it's a piece of text, and then we tell the parameter what type of data it is. Now in this case the login name is going to be string, and you'll see there's lots of these. So type code is what it uses. So if you've got boolean values, dates, etc., okay, you can select the correct one. So but this is going to be a string, and then we need to give it the username. Now the username is in our text box, tx login name. But remember, that's the text box. We want the text property, so it's nearly like doing a Windows one. So that parentheses, I wish you could see my finger poking at the screen, but you can't. That parentheses closes the new parameter, so we need another parentheses to close the add subroutine. Then we can put our semicolon. Okay, so we've added that one. Now we need to add the parameter for the password. If you don't put them in the same order, you are going to bugger everything up, so don't do that. If you press escape, it'll get rid of that little helper if you don't want it on screen. So again, the type code for this is going to be a string, and we're going to get our information from the password box, but the text property of the password box. So that creates our parameters. What we then need to do is create a data view to hold the data that's going to come back from our little query. Now this query is going to be run by our helper code, okay, which is in our data class. So data dot, we want to do execute and fill, because that allows us to run a query and get some results back. So the command we want is our SQL command. That was created here, remember, that's what all that baloney was for. And we have got parameters for this, so we're just going to say PC. So using those parameters. So that will run it, and it will fill the data view up. Now, if we don't get anything matching, so someone's put the wrong login or password in and that we don't find a match, we shouldn't get any records. So we can test for that. So you'll be doing this tam. So we can say dv.count. If it's greater than 0, we got some records. So we have a record. So we'll worry about what we can do about that in a sec. But if we didn't get any records, then that means there is no accurate user details. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say storage.clearUser, just in case someone's messing about. Okay, so I'm going to make sure any credentials that were there are gone. Okay, just to be safe. So I'm just going to put a little comment, no matching user and password. But if we did get a record, there should only be one record that matches this. Okay. Theoretically, there should only be one record that matches a login name and password, but we'll come to that in a subsequent video because you don't want multiple login names. We'll come to that when we start looking at validation. Right, so if we have got a record, what we're going to do is we're going to fill up our storage information. So we can say storage.userid equals, now when we're retrieving data from databases, we need to cast them because they're, again, they appear as objects. And this is how we do it. We say record, the first record, which is record not. Remember, in C# and most languages, lists of things start with the first item at 0. Okay, so the first thing we want, and we can use the username, so we've got that up here, user ID, and we put that in brackets. Okay, so that will store the user ID from the database. So this is coming from the database, so this is all nice and dynamic. Set the name, and that's string data, so string dv naught So these are square brackets, and we want the name, which I've got as forename in my database. And the last bit was the status. So that was my access level. Again, it's string information, just a bit of text. So db naught, and the field name was called f status. So I'm just copying and pasting it because that'll make it sensible. Right, I'm now going to reload the page. Okay, so I'm going to say response.redirect to default.aspx. Now, to be honest, what we ought to do, we ought to reload the page every time they do this login click anyway. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to move that. I've changed my mind and I'm going to put it there. So no matter whether we manage to log in successfully or not, we reload the page. Okay. And that really is logging in. So I'm just going to put XML comment at the top of this subroutine. Attempt to log in user. Okay, we could put some messages up, but we'll do that in the next video. That's going to show you how to do validation for this. Okay, so attempt to log in user, set up the query, set up the parameters for the query in the same order. So checking login name against login name, password against password. Run the query using our helper. Capture the result in a data view. Ask the data view if it's got any records. If it has, we must have a user. So fill in the user persistent details in our storage. If we haven't got a user, so there were no records, clear it. Make sure that none of those persistent details exist so that nobody's logged on. Then finally reload the page. Let's just see if it works. Let's have a reminder. I've got two users in here, me and me, login name me, password me, login name you, password you. So let's just run our web page. Go back to our default and press F5 to run it. Hopefully it'll work and not bug up. Right, so let's try me, login. Hey, all those buttons have moved. Remember our code was set up, if I just show you the code again at the start, if I logged in, okay, so if users logged in, this was the bit, I hide the login name, password box, login button and the register button. So if we go back, that's what it did. When I click log out, and it's even saying welcome back Eric, when I click log out it shows them again. So let's check the other one. It was you and you. Welcome back Dave. That was the name. Look at my database, look, my normal user was Dave. Okay, going back to my code. Go back to my website, log that out. Let's check for a user that doesn't exist. So let's do Dave Bloke. It just says welcome guest to the site. Okay, so let's just have a quick squiz at that again, the code for that. So if I'm on my web page and I haven't got my code but I want to look at my code, just right click over it, view code, just like you did on the Windows stuff last year. So my logout button was just a matter of clearing the user details, redisplaying the page. The login button, create a query to interrogate the database with parameters. If we got a match, set up my details. If not, clear it and then reload the page. Okay, and that is logging in.